60 acres of dead, blackened sunflowers stood as a monument to one woman's ruin. The local cooperative laughed, officially branding the harvest a total loss. But buried in that rotting field was a liquid gold mine that wouldn't just save the family farm, it would buy out the very people who mocked her. The wind howling across the Red River Valley carried the distinct, bitter scent of rot. Clara Harding stood at the edge of her 60-acre field, her worn leather work boots sinking into the damp North Dakota soil. She reached out with a calloused hand, snapping the head off a drooping sunflower. It crumbled between her fingers, a tragic mess of withered black petals and white, fuzzy mold. This was supposed to be the crop that saved her. For 3 generations, the Harding farm had survived on a steady, conservative rotation of corn and soybeans. But survival wasn't enough anymore. When Clara's father passed away 2 years ago, he left behind a legacy of hard work and a mountain of hidden debt. The agricultural loans had piled up, suffocating the farm with compounding interest. By spring, the bank had sent their final warning. Clara had exactly 1 season to clear a $420,000 balloon payment, or the bank would auction off the land her grandfather had cleared by hand. Conventional crops wouldn't cut it. The profit margins on soybeans had tanked due to international trade disputes, and fertilizer costs had quadrupled. Clara needed a miracle. She found it in high oleic sunflowers, a specialized premium crop highly sought after by the health food sector for its heart-healthy oil. The seed was staggeringly expensive, and the local Valley Growers Cooperative was the only buyer within 200 miles. Greg Jenkins, the regional buyer for the co-op, had warned her against it from the start. Jenkins was a corporate man, a guy whose boots never saw mud and whose hands had never greased a combine. "You're an independent, Clara," Jenkins had sneered over a cup of diner coffee back in April. "Sunflowers are finicky. They require specialized harvesting heads. They dry out weird, and if the moisture content isn't perfect, I'll dock your pay to pennies on the dollar. Stick to soybeans, take the loss gracefully, sell a few acres to pay the bank." Clara had refused. She mortgaged the farm's equipment to buy the specialized seeds and the specialized combine headers. For the first 3 months, her gamble looked like pure genius. By mid-July, the 60 acres were a breathtaking sea of vibrant golden yellow. The stalks were thick, the heads massive and heavy with developing seeds. Clara finally allowed herself to sleep through the night, calculating the payout that would not only clear her debt, but leave her with enough capital to expand. Then came the second week of August. It started with a freak midsummer hailstorm that bruised the stalks and shredded the leaves, leaving the plants deeply vulnerable. If that had been the end of it, the crop might have survived. But the hail was followed by 3 weeks of unseasonably cold, stagnant humidity. It was the perfect breeding ground for Sclerotinia sclerotiorum, white mold. Within days, the disease swept through the densely packed field like a plague. The vibrant yellow heads turned a sickly, bruised brown. The stalks hollowed out, snapping under their own weight. The pristine black seeds were scarred, discolored, and covered in a chalky white film. Now in late September, the harvest was a graveyard. The sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway pulled Clara from her despair. Jenkins's immaculate silver Ford F-150 rolled to a stop near the barn. He stepped out, wearing a crisp windbreaker and carrying an aluminum clipboard, looking entirely out of place against the backdrop of the dying farm. Clara walked to meet him, her jaw set. Jenkins didn't even bother saying hello. He walked straight to the nearest row of sunflowers, snapped a head, and rubbed the seeds in his palm. He brushed his hands off on his pants in disgust. "White mold, Clara, and the hail damage is extensive," Jenkins said, his voice laced with a frustrating mix of pity and vindication. "The seed coats are scarred, the test weights are going to be abysmal, and the aesthetic grade is a 0. The meat inside is still developing," Clara argued, her voice tight but remarkably steady. "The oleic content should still be there. You can blend it at the silos. You've taken worse from the corporate farms down south. I take standard grade from them because they can guarantee volume. Jenkins countered, tapping his pen against the clipboard. This is a liability. The commercial snack buyers won't touch discolored seeds, and the commercial crushers don't want the mold spores in their machinery. I'm sorry, Clara. The co-op is rejecting the entire contract. We're writing this off as a total loss. Clara felt the ground tilt beneath her. Greg, you can't do that. I have a contract. A contract with a quality clause, Jenkins corrected, holding up the clipboard. Read the fine print. If the crop fails to meet Grade 2 standards, the cooperative reserves the right to refuse delivery. This isn't even Grade 4. It's bird seed, Clara, and honestly, I don't think even the birds would eat it. He handed her the official rejection notice. It felt heavy in her hands. I have 30 days before the bank forecloses, Clara said, her voice dropping to a whisper. If you don't buy this, my family loses everything. Jenkins sighed, a practiced corporate sigh. Call Mr. Henderson at the bank. Tell him you're liquidating. I'm sure he'll give you a few extra weeks to pack up the house. Good luck, Clara. Jenkins drove away, leaving Clara standing alone with 60 acres of worthless, rotting flowers and a piece of paper that effectively ended her life as a farmer. For 3 days, Clara didn't leave the farmhouse. The rejection notice sat on the kitchen table, right next to the looming foreclosure letter from Oak Haven National Bank. She spent hours staring out the window at the decaying stalks, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of her failure. The town of Oak Haven was already whispering at the local diner. The old-timers shook their heads, lamenting that a woman couldn't run a farm on her own without her father's guidance. On the fourth night, fueled by a mixture of exhaustion and bitter defiance, Clara walked out into the field with a flashlight. She ripped a blackened sunflower head from its stalk and carried it back to the kitchen. She dumped the ugly, scarred seeds onto the oak table. Jenkins was right about one thing. They looked terrible. The hulls were brittle and discolored. Frustrated, Clara grabbed a heavy cast-iron rolling pin and smashed it down on a handful of the seeds. The dry hulls cracked and splintered, but as Clara swept the debris aside, she stopped. The heavy paper ledger beneath the crushed seeds was soaking wet. Clara touched the paper, then rubbed her fingers together. It wasn't water. It was a thick, viscous, incredibly slick oil. She brought her fingers to her nose. The smell was astonishing. Rich, earthy, with a deep, roasted nuttiness that smelled nothing like the cheap, highly refined sunflower oil sold in plastic bottles at the grocery store. Her mind raced. The hail and the mold had destroyed the outer appearance of the plant. But what if the stress of the disease had triggered a survival response in the seeds? Plants under extreme environmental stress often altered their lipid production. At dawn, Clara scooped 3 pounds of the damaged seeds into a heavy-duty Ziploc bag and drove 3 hours east to a private agricultural testing laboratory in Fargo. She paid the $300 expedited testing fee out of her dwindling grocery budget. 2 days later, Dr. Eris Miller, the head biochemist at the lab, called her. Clara, I ran your samples twice because I didn't believe the initial readout, Dr. Miller said, his voice crackling over the poor cellular reception. What on earth did you do to these sunflowers? Clara's stomach plummeted. Are they ruined? Did the mold contaminate the oil? Contaminate? No, the hull protected the kernel perfectly. Dr. Miller laughed in disbelief. Clara, standard high oleic sunflowers hit about 80% oleic acid. Because your plants were fighting off the mold and the cold snap, they hyperconcentrated their energy into seed viability. The oleic acid content in your sample is nearly 92%. The antioxidant profile is off the charts. If you can extract this cleanly, this isn't commercial cooking oil. This is premium, artisanal-grade cosmetics and culinary oil. It's liquid gold. Clara hung up the phone, her heart hammering against her ribs. The co-op wouldn't buy her seeds because they were ugly, but she didn't need to sell the seeds. She needed to sell what was inside them. There was just one massive problem. She had no way to get it out. Commercial crushers required minimum runs of thousands of tons and would charge exorbitant tolling fees she couldn't afford. To press 60 acres of seeds herself, she needed an industrial-grade cold-press oil expeller. Clara spent the next 48 hours scouring the darkest corners of agricultural auction websites. Finally, she found it, a heavily used 10-year-old continuous screw press sitting in a dusty barn in Ohio. The previous owner, an eccentric farmer named Arthur Pendleton, had used it for pressing specialty flaxseed before going bankrupt. He was asking $15,000 for the machine. Clara had $400 in her checking account. She walked out to the main barn and pulled the tarp off her father's pride and joy, a fully restored 1972 John Deere 4320 tractor. It was a classic, a mechanical masterpiece her father had spent 5 years rebuilding. It was the only thing of real value left on the farm that the bank didn't have a lien on. Tears burned her eyes as she took photos of the gleaming green paint. She posted it on a classic tractor forum. Within 12 hours, a collector from Minnesota wired her $22,000. Watching the flatbed tow the John Deere down her driveway felt like watching her father die all over again. But Clara had no time for grief. She wired Arthur Pendleton the money and paid an independent freight trucker to haul the massive press to North Dakota. When the machine arrived 5 days later, Clara nearly broke down. It was a rusted, grease-caked behemoth. The hopper was dented. The electrical wiring was frayed, and the main extraction auger looked like it hadn't been cleaned in a decade. Clara called the only person in town she trusted, Dean Hobbs, a mechanic whose farm bordered hers. Dean was a quiet, burly man who had always respected Clara's grit. "Jesus, Clara," Dean muttered, circling the massive steel contraption in her barn. "This thing looks like a Soviet submarine part. Can you fix it, Dean?" Clara asked, handing him a mug of black coffee. "I have 20 days before the bank takes the land. I need to start pressing by tomorrow night." Dean took a sip of the coffee, rolled up his grease-stained sleeves, and grabbed his heavy toolbox. "We're gonna need more coffee, and a blowtorch." For 36 straight hours, Clara and Dean did not sleep. They scrubbed the augers with steel wool, spliced new wiring into the industrial motor, and recalibrated the pressure valves. Word spread through Oak Haven quickly. By noon the next day, Greg Jenkins was holding court at the local diner, loudly mocking Clara's desperate attempt to turn moldy birdseed into snake oil. By midnight on the second day, the press was fully reassembled. Clara had harvested a test batch of seeds, running them through an ancient grain cleaner to remove the stalks and the worst of the moldy dust. Dean flipped the main breaker. The barn lights dimmed as the massive electric motor roared to life. The machine groaned, a deep, metallic screech that made Clara's teeth ache. "Feed it," Dean yelled over the deafening noise. Clara climbed the ladder and dumped 50 pounds of the blackened seeds into the hopper. The auger caught them, grinding them down with immense, bone-crushing pressure. The machine shuddered violently. Clara held her breath, terrified the rusted metal would shatter. Then, from the stainless steel extraction spout at the bottom, a single, thick drop fell into the glass collection vat. Then another. Within seconds, a steady stream of oil began to pour. It wasn't the pale yellow of cheap supermarket oil. It was a vibrant, rich, emerald gold. The smell filled the cold barn immediately, a warm, intoxicating aroma of roasted nuts, fresh earth, and pure, concentrated life. Dean turned off the machine, plunging the barn into a sudden, ringing silence. Clara walked over to the vat, dipped her finger into the warm oil, and brought it to the light. It caught the glare of the overhead bulb, glowing like amber. She had the oil. It was perfect. But she had 60 acres left to harvest, press, bottle, and somehow sell in less than 3 weeks. And Greg Jenkins was about to realize exactly what he had thrown away. Harvesting the remaining 60 acres of blighted sunflowers was a logistical nightmare. The stalks, weakened by the white mold and the early frosts, were brittle as glass. If Clara ran the combine at standard speed, the stalks would shatter, dropping the precious seed heads into the mud before the header could catch them. Clara and Dean Hobbs spent an entire afternoon modifying the combine. They adjusted the reel speed to a crawl and widened the concave clearance, treating the dying crop with a delicate reverence usually reserved for fragile specialty herbs. It took them 4 grueling days to harvest the field. By the end, the farm's storage bins held over 80,000 pounds of ugly, scarred, intensely valuable seed. The barn transformed into a deafening 24-hour manufacturing floor. Dean wrangled 2 of his nephews, Bobby and Wyatt, to run the midnight shifts. The old continuous screw press squealed and shuddered incessantly, but it held together. Slowly, gallon by gallon, the emerald gold oil filled the massive food-grade IBC totes Clara had managed to purchase on credit from a local dairy supplier. But having the oil was only half the battle. Clara needed a buyer, and she needed one in less than 2 weeks. Armed with Dr. Eris Miller's staggering lab reports, Clara bypassed the agricultural sector entirely. If this oil was 92% oleic acid with an off-the-charts antioxidant profile, it belonged in high-end cosmetics and elite culinary kitchens, not deep fryers. She spent her brief periods of rest cold-calling procurement directors across the country. She sent overnight FedEx samples packaged in small, elegant glass vials, using the last remnants of the cash she'd gotten from selling her father's tractor. For 3 days, the phone didn't ring. The bank deadline loomed, a suffocating weight that made it hard for Clara to breathe. Then, on a Tuesday morning, the farmhouse phone rang. It was Vivian Croft, the notoriously ruthless head of procurement for Botanica Lux, a premier skincare brand based in New York. "Miss Harding," Vivian's voice was crisp and strictly business. "My lead formulator has been testing your sample for the past 48 hours. He insists I am lying to him about the source. He claims an oleic profile this dense, with this level of vitamin E, can only be achieved through synthetic fortification." "Oh, it's completely natural, Miss Croft," Clara said, gripping the phone cord tightly. "It's a high-stress yield, cold-pressed, unrefined, and untouched by chemical solvents. We are currently sourcing our base lipids from a supplier in Morocco." Vivian continued. "Your oil absorbs faster and leaves 0 comedogenic residue. If you can guarantee me 3,000 gallons of this exact grade, I will offer you $160 a gallon. But I need exclusivity for the cosmetic sector." Clara's mind went blank. 3,000 gallons at $160 a gallon. That was nearly $500,000. It was enough to clear the $420,000 balloon payment to Oak Haven National Bank, pay Dean and his nephews a massive bonus, and still have operating capital left over. "You have a deal, Ms. Croft. I can ship the totes by the end of the week." Clara ran to the barn, tears of absolute relief streaming down her face, and threw her arms around Dean's neck. The nightmare was over. She had saved the farm, but in a small town like Oak Haven, secrets are impossible to keep. The freight company Clara hired to transport the IBC totes to New York required an agricultural origin certificate. The local clerk who stamped the paperwork casually mentioned the destination and the insured value of the freight to her brother, who happened to be a grain inspector for the Valley Growers Cooperative. Within hours, the gossip reached Greg Jenkins. Jenkins was livid. He had publicly mocked Clara, written off her crop, and reported to his regional directors that the Harding farm was a dead end. Now, rumors were swirling that the moldy bird seed he rejected was worth a fortune. If his bosses found out he had legally released a $500,000 asset, out of sheer arrogance, his career would be over. Jenkins didn't just want to save his own skin. He wanted the oil. 2 days before Clara was scheduled to ship the totes, a sleek black sedan pulled up the gravel driveway, trailing behind Jenkins's silver Ford. Jenkins stepped out, accompanied by a man in an expensive charcoal suit carrying a leather briefcase. Clara stepped out of the barn, wiping axle grease from her hands with a rag. Dean stood right behind her, a heavy steel wrench dangling casually from his right hand. "Clara," Jenkins said, forcing a tight, insincere smile. "Looks like you've been busy." "You're trespassing, Greg," Clara said coldly. "State your business and get off my land." The man in the suit stepped forward. "Ms. Harding, I am Arthur Pendleton's former legal counsel, now representing the legal interests of the Valley Growers Cooperative. We have been made aware that you are attempting to commercialize a crop grown under contract with my client." "The co-op rejected the crop," Clara countered, her heart beginning to hammer. "The cooperative rejected the seeds based on commercial grain standards," the lawyer corrected smoothly. "However, your original seed financing contract contains a proprietary rights clause. It stipulates that any derivatives, byproducts, or processed goods originating from the cooperative's proprietary seed genetics remain the right of first refusal for the cooperative." Jenkins crossed his arms, looking deeply satisfied. "You used our seed to make this oil, Clara. You don't have the legal right to sell it to New York. Oh, the co-op is exercising its right to seize the processed asset to cover your outstanding seed debt. And furthermore, we've spoken to Mr. Henderson at the bank. He's fully prepared to accelerate your foreclosure tomorrow morning if you try to move those totes." Clara stared at them. They weren't just trying to steal her oil. They were trying to steal the farm out from under her at the finish line. "What? We have a truck coming to collect the totes at 8 a.m. tomorrow." Jenkins sneered. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, Clara. You lost." The barn was terrifyingly quiet after Jenkins and the lawyer drove away. Dean kicked a loose wooden pallet, sending it clattering against the wall. "They can't do this, Clara. It's theft," Dean growled. "I'll park my combine across the driveway. No truck is getting in here tomorrow." "No, Dean," Clara said, her voice shaking, but her eyes burning with a sudden fierce clarity. "A standoff will just get the sheriff involved, and the bank will foreclose while the oil sits in an impound lot. We don't fight them with tractors. We fight them with their own arrogance." Clara ran into the farmhouse and tore through the stack of paperwork on her kitchen table. She pulled out the original financing contract and flipped to the proprietary rights clause the lawyer had cited. It was there, buried in dense legalese. The co-op laid claim to all derivatives of their seed. But Clara remembered something else. She grabbed the official rejection notice Jenkins had handed her in the field 3 weeks ago. She flattened it out under the kitchen light and read the fine print at the bottom of the form. A slow, sharp smile spread across her face. Jenkins, in his rush to completely wash his hands of her failing crop, had used the co-op's standard total loss and liability waiver form. At 7:30 a.m. the next morning, the farm was cloaked in a thick, chilling fog. A massive flatbed semi-truck belonging to the cooperative rumbled up the driveway, followed closely by Jenkins's Ford and the lawyer's sedan. Clara was waiting on the porch, holding a thermos of coffee and a manila folder. Dean stood beside her, his arms crossed. Jenkins hopped out of his truck, looking triumphant. "Morning, Clara. I see you've accepted reality. Where are the totes?" "They aren't here, Greg," Clara said simply, taking a sip of her coffee. Jenkins froze. "What do you mean they aren't here? If you hid them, I will have the sheriff arrest you for grand larceny." "I didn't hide them," Clara replied. "They left at 3 a.m. on a refrigerated freight truck bound for New York. The buyer has already taken possession in transit." The lawyer stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Ms. Harding, you are in direct violation of the proprietary rights clause. We will sue you into bankruptcy, and Oak Haven National Bank will take this land by noon." "I don't think so," Clara said. She opened the manila folder and handed a photocopy of a document to the lawyer. "Read paragraph 4, section B, out loud." The lawyer snatched the paper. It was a copy of the rejection notice. His eyes scanned the text, and slowly the color drained from his face. "Read it," Clara demanded, stepping off the porch. The lawyer cleared his throat, his voice suddenly small. "In the event of a total crop rejection, the cooperative hereby waives all claims, liens, rights of refusal, and proprietary interests in the rejected biomass, in releasing the grower from all contractual obligations regarding the disposal or secondary usage of said biomass. Jenkins snatched the paper from the lawyer's hands. "What is this? This isn't the standard rejection form." "Yes, it is," Clara smiled, her voice dripping with hard-earned satisfaction. "It's the standard form for a liability waiver. You were so desperate to make sure the co-op wouldn't be held responsible for the cost of clearing my moldy birdseed that you officially severed the co-op's legal rights to the crop. You didn't just reject the sunflowers, Greg. You legally abandoned them, and under state agricultural law, abandoned biomass belongs to the landowner." Jenkins stared at the paper, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He had handed her the very loophole that destroyed his claim. "Now," Clara said, pulling her cell phone from her pocket, "if you don't mind, I have a very important phone call to take." Right on cue, the phone rang. It was Mr. Henderson from Oak Haven National Bank. Clara put it on speakerphone. "Clara," Mr. Henderson said, his voice unusually cheerful. "I just wanted to call and confirm. A wire transfer from Botanica Lux out of New York just cleared our holding account. $480,000. Your balloon payment is entirely satisfied, and we've transferred the remaining $60,000 into your operating account. The farm is yours, free and clear." Jenkins looked as though he might vomit. He had not only lost the oil, but he had lost his leverage with the bank. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," Clara said. "I'll be down later this week to pick up the deed." She ended the call and looked back at Jenkins. "You have exactly 60 seconds to get off my property before I have Dean call the sheriff and press charges for criminal trespassing." Jenkins didn't say a word. He practically ran to his truck, the lawyer trailing closely behind. The flatbed semi clumsily reversed down the driveway, kicking up gravel in its retreat. The aftermath was swift and brutal for the Valley Growers Cooperative. When Richard Cole, the regional director, discovered that Jenkins had legally abandoned an asset worth $500,000 due to a petty grudge, Jenkins was fired without severance. Clara, however, was just getting started. The following spring, she didn't plant corn or soybeans. She planted 100 acres of high oleic sunflowers. Using the surplus cash from her contract with Botanica Lux, she bought 3 more industrial oil expellers and built a proper, sanitized extraction facility in her largest barn. When neighboring independent farmers realized what she was doing, they started coming to her instead of the co-op. Clara offered them fair tolling rates, processing their specialty crops, and helping them negotiate direct contracts with high-end buyers. Also, she became the very thing Jenkins had tried to crush, an independent powerhouse. Standing at the edge of her fields a year later, the summer air was warm and smelled of rich earth. A vast, breathtaking sea of golden sunflowers swayed in the North Dakota breeze. They weren't blighted, they weren't dying, they were thriving, their faces turned toward the sun, completely untouchable. Clara Harding reached out, resting her hand gently on a thick green stalk. She had gambled everything on a dying field, and the earth had paid her back in liquid gold. Thank you for joining us for this incredible journey of Clara Harding. If you loved seeing how she outsmarted the corporate co-op and turned a total loss into liquid gold, please smash that like button and share this video with your friends. Your support helps us bring more amazing real-life farming dramas to light. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our upcoming stories of resilience and underdog victories.